show. It's the one.
As Bob Schiefer turns the anchor chair over to Katie Couric, join us for a salute to a remarkable journalist and friend tonight on the CBS Evening News. Right after CBS 4 News, so stay with us.
This is Bob Schiefer's last night anchoring the Evening News. It's coming up next. That's our news for now. Thanks for joining us.
Remember, we're always on at CBS4.com. We'll see you at 11.
I'm Bob Schiefer. The security of the free world depends on an American victory in Iraq. That's what President Bush said today, and that's where we'll start tonight. Then we'll have these stories.
In the fight against global warming, California goes its own way, legislating a big cut in greenhouse gas emissions. I'm John Blackstone.
I'm Dr. John LaPook on how researchers are finding new ways to boost the body's own defenses to fight cancer.
And it's Bob's last night in the anchor chair. For my first story at CBS, I'll take a look back at his remarkable career.
You want me to tell you a secret? I've really enjoyed it.
This is the CBS Evening News with Bob Schiefer.
Good evening. Well, tonight does mark my last night at this desk, and we'll have more on that later in the broadcast. But as I said on my first broadcast here 18 months ago, the news always will come first here, and there is plenty to report tonight. President Bush has come on strong about Iraq before, but never quite the way he did today. In a speech to the American Legion in Salt Lake City, he said an American withdrawal from Iraq would lead to a conquest by America's worst enemies. It would be so devastating, he went on to say, that the security of the civilized world depends on it. We're going first tonight to the White House, and our correspondent there, Jim Axelrod. Jim?
Well, Bob, with less than 10 weeks to Election Day, President Bush is on a rescue mission of sorts for his policy in Iraq. He is speaking in very dramatic terms to draw distinctions with Democrats.
If we give up the fight in the streets of Baghdad, we will face the terrorists in the streets of our own cities.
The president picked one of the most hawkish groups in one of the most conservative states as his audience for remaking his case for the war in Iraq. The American Legion Convention in Salt Lake City, Utah.
The security of the civilized world depends on victory in the war on terror, and that depends on victory in Iraq. So the United States of America will not leave until victory is achieved.
With the latest CBS News New York Times poll showing a majority of Americans still believing there's no connection between the war in Iraq and the war on terror, Mr. Bush is changing tactics to change minds, describing Iraq in epic terms, the scene of a battle between the forces of freedom and liberty on one hand and those of extremism and tyranny on the other.
We should all agree that the battle for Iraq is now central to the ideological struggle of the 21st century.
Clearly, the president has heard his critics who question what the war in Iraq has to do with keeping America safe. He's now answering in terms that recall profound struggles of the past, casting the terrorists who covet Iraq as the latest in a long line of America's enemies.
There are successors to fascists, to Nazis, to communists, and other totalitarians of the 20th century. And history shows what the outcome will be.
The president will continue to hammer at this idea in the run-up to 9/11. It gives him a way to address one of his biggest weaknesses, the war in Iraq, by having it absorbed by one of his biggest strengths, how he's perceived to be handling the war on terror. Bob?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jim. More than 3,500 people died in Iraq in July, most of them civilians. That was the worst month of the war since the invasion. But the U.S. military reported today that the death toll will be considerably lower this month, part of the crackdown on security and the fact that U.S. troop strength is now up to 140,000. That is the most since January. Mark Strassman has been out with some of those troops as they move through some of Baghdad's worst neighborhoods.
No electricity in here. No.
General J.D. Thurman needs time to restore what Baghdad's Adamiyah neighborhood has lost. Power. It's been out for 3 blistering months. This man tried sleeping on his roof. Gunshots chased him back inside.
You can't sleep inside because it's too hot. You can't sleep upstairs because it's not safe.
Yes, not safe.
Not safe like most of Baghdad, where a series of explosions today killed more than 50 people. 3 years into the Iraq War, the capital is still so dangerous, Thurman has to lead sweeps through its worst neighborhoods, like Adamiyah. Surrounded by sharpshooters today, he drew a crowd. Just yesterday, this man tells Thurman, gunmen threw his brother in the trunk of a car and disappeared.
What's his name?
Salam.
Salam, Arabic for peace, a word rarely heard in Adamiyah. Until this recent crackdown, 15 people a day were murdered here.
For months, gunmen have been coming into this Sunni neighborhood, kidnapping people, killing people, almost at will. From what residents here say, those gunmen are Shia militia members from neighboring Sadr City.
Show me how we shut that down.
Thurman hoped checkpoints on Sadr City's bridges would slow down its killers. But here, where's the barricade his plan called for?
We got that stuff, and that's what's supposed to happen.
A lot here still hasn't happened. Many Iraqis have zero confidence in their new government. Gunmen run wild because there's still no official policy about militias.
Is that frustrating for you as a soldier?
Of course. I need the government to support me, to disarm the militias, or to destroy completely the militias.
Before the dozens of militias here destroy what's left of Iraqi hope. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Baghdad.
Well, as of tonight, we are halfway through hurricane season, and the southeast is bracing for what could be its first hurricane. Ernesto, which is now a tropical storm, is already bringing strong wind and rain to the area. It could hit land sometime tonight, possibly as a hurricane. A hurricane watch is up tonight along the coast of the Carolinas, so we want to bring in our hurricane expert, Brian Norcross from CBS 4 in Miami. Well, Brian, what's ahead here?
Well, it looks like we're going to have a strong storm on the Carolina coast, as you say, Bob, possibly a hurricane. Hurricane hunters were out investigating the storm, flying all through it this afternoon. Couldn't quite find hurricane-force winds, but the expectation is when it comes ashore on the North Carolina coast, somewhere near Cape Fear, just south of Wilmington, may well have winds just over 75 miles an hour. But that's not going to be the end of the story. It's going to be a significant flooding event through eastern North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, on up into the Northeast, including as far north as upstate New York.
Well, how long do you think this one's going to take to play out?
It'll take the rest of the week. By the weekend, things should start to taper off, but they're going to feel it even into southern Canada.
And what about that flooding? Where do you think that will be the worst?
Looks like eastern North Carolina into Virginia, possibly Maryland, and then it will start to lighten up as we go north. But they could have problems in eastern Pennsylvania and in New York State as well.
Okay, Brian. Well, thanks a lot. And in the Pacific, where there's a whole different set of hurricane names, Hurricane John has forced evacuation of resorts popular with Americans in Mexico's Baja California peninsula. John is a Category 2 hurricane with 105-mile-an-hour winds. It's headed straight for Cabo San Lucas and other towns on Baja's southern tip. 15,000 people were ordered to leave. Many scientists believe that global warming is contributing to the number and intensity of hurricanes and other storms. The Bush administration has resisted calls to limit greenhouse gas emissions by industry. So, as we first reported last night, California has decided to act on its own and is leading the way now with the toughest emission standards in the country. John Blackstone with more on that.
Going its own way on global warming, America's most populated state intends to roll back its greenhouse gas emissions to the level they were in 1990. California's Republican governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, gave up waiting for the federal government to act.
I love when California is #1 because it's so important that we not only think about, making businesses boom, but we also simultaneously have to protect the environment. And we can't do both.
Other states share California's frustration with the federal response to global warming. At least 17 states have taken some action on their own or have joined lawsuits trying to force Washington to limit greenhouse gases.
And the United States is a quarter of the world's emissions of greenhouse gases. So what our states do matter, what we do matters, and it's a big deal.
Under California's law, big polluters will have to begin reporting their greenhouse gas emissions in 2 years and start to make cuts in 6 years.